everyone, and thanks for joining us again in Transforming the World Through Reflections. Today, we're going to focus on mental health in our communities of color. And I'm joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Makisha Lawrence.
Hello.
I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so glad I'm here with you.
And I think we should just jump into this.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So, how are you doing, and what are your reflections on where we are in the pandemic?
Oh gosh, there's so many.
Yes.
I think I'm, at least for myself and personally, I'm feeling a little bit more hopeful as things are starting to evolve and as science is starting to kind of help in terms of our protection.
Yes.
Which means that we can actually get out and do things and be engaged in social situations that also feed us.
Yes.
Whereas the past 2 years have been a very truncated version of connection. And you know that, we're built for that.
Exactly.
We're built for that. Yeah.
Exactly. And, you and I have had an opportunity to talk during these episodes and also with other colleagues that joined us in these episodes. And frequently, we just gravitated to connection. And we've been through this roller coaster in this pandemic. And so this is a time of shifting. A lot is shifting. And I'm noticing that in the last few conversations, that's the main focus, the shifting. Because the pandemic made so many things more visible.
Absolutely.
They were already happening for generations, and now more visible. Not only to those of us who've suffered it, but those who have not been equally impacted.
Correct.
Right? So one of the things that I'm feeling hopeful about, and I join you in the hopefulness, is that because mental health is being discussed more frequently, given what we've been going through worldwide, I wonder what your thoughts are on the shift that's taking place now.
In communities of color, or?
In communities of color as it relates to mental health, even talking about mental health.
Sure. I think that if we really look at certain aspects of our diaspora, we can see mental health presented in lots of different ways. Mental health presented in religion, mental health presented in music, mental health presented in dance. What we do, what you and I do, is just another facet of the ways in which people in our diaspora have already been trying to connect to their spirit and mind. And there is a Western component to it, which is sitting down face to face with someone. But at the same time, if you think about it diasporically, if I had an issue, I would go to a babalao.
Right.
Or a mamalao. Or I would go to a curandera. Or I would go to some elder in the community that would have information about how it is that I'm supposed to heal. Or what it is that I need to do to heal. I think what's different about it now with the Western touch is that we have degrees behind our name. And that, I think, that sitting down formally, or the concept of it as being formal, can feel more Western to people in the diaspora, even though we are also Westernly conditioned. There are some things that are not. And so I think that more and more what I'm hearing from many people of color is like being able to sit down with someone and they make a statement and you get it. And it's not pathologized. And that's the biggest part of it. Like if, you had a client that came to you and they were like, yeah, my mom was, doing X, Y, and Z, and then she fell out. Okay, so then somebody in another kind of training modality might say, she fell out. Well, was that a fugue? Was that a this, or was that no, it wasn't no fugue. She fell out.
She fell out.
So it's just kind of translating and understanding some of the wording. And the phrasing that happens within the diaspora, and making it more comfortable for people of color to kind of come in and be able to be seen in that way, as opposed to be seen and then pathologized.
agreed completely. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how important it is to really acknowledge that we have, for generations, inherited ways of healing. So you're talking about the music, the religion, you know, seeking the elders. All of these things are inherited. And yes, we participate in those things sometimes unconsciously.
Yes.
We do healing things even unconsciously. And so to add this westernized approach is something that may seem new, but it has a touch of what we too have inherited and have been practicing. I heard you mention how important it is to really pay attention to the way the person we're helping, how they describe their experience and not pathologize it. You know, have cultural context.
Yes.
Get familiar with the way people talk about their pain and their healing, so that we don't jump to our diagnostic book and call things what they're not.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
What have you noticed in terms of our communities of color now being more willing to reach out for this form of support now that it's being discussed more among us?
Yeah. I think we're in a space right now where, because mental health is being much more comfortably talked about in many communities, that they are seeking out mental health practitioners. I think where we are, though, for people of color, is they're requesting people of color. The field is traditionally not encompassed with people of color. And so there have been, I mean, you know, so many ways in which people will call and say, I would prefer to have a Latina. I would prefer to have an African-American woman. I would prefer to have a Chinese descended person, because the people are looking for that similarity, right? But then they're also looking to see themselves in another. And if we sit and think about what traditional therapy looks like, especially like olden days, then what was it, Freud sitting behind the couch, not even sitting and looking at you in the eye.
Right.
He's sitting behind the couch, you
Right.
laying on the couch, which is a very vulnerable position. If you see dogs roll over, they only roll over and show their tummy because they feel vulnerable and like they can trust you.
Right.
And so if you think about those old ways of looking at therapy, many people are not gonna jive with that.
Not gonna fly. Not gonna fly.
No.
And it is at the core of why people of color have resisted this kind of support.
Yes.
You don't see yourself in it.
No.
You don't see yourself in it, and the people that you perceive to be the only ones in it are also the people that you identify as the oppressor.
Yes.
Why would you want to go there? So, you know, I really am thankful that now this process of including in our clinical community more of us, people of color, presents alternatives
Yeah.
to the community. Like, wait a minute, here's somebody that looks like me. Maybe they can hear me more deeply.
Maybe they can see me more clearly.
Yes. And that's, speaking of which, I am reminded of something I learned from you. I love that phrase you use frequently. We want to be witnessed.
We want
We want to
someone
be
to bear
witnessed.
witness to us. Yeah.
To witness our lives. You know, and that's connected to this African proverb, Ubuntu. I am because we are. So we do have a need to feel witness, and so for trust to build, it makes such a difference to see a clinician that looks like us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, however, it's not that simple.
Nope.
It's not that simple. Some trust building needs to happen.
Yes.
You know, because we can easily be seen as are you selling out to this other way of healing?
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, are you really taking into account our history?
Mm-hmm. Or
Right?
the internal histories that happen within culture,
Mm-hmm.
where we also experience trauma from each other. And so if there is an African American male coming to see me, he may already have trauma issues related to being around Black women. And so why would I trust you off the bat if,
Right?
if I've been told X, Y, and Z by Black women, or the other way around?
Exactly.
So those are the other nuances that we always have to include.
We have to include so many details.
Mm-hmm.
So that calls for pausing to reflect, which is the main message that these episodes want to convey.
Yes.
You know, let us pause to reflect. We'll catch a more panoramic view of things.
Yeah.
We will be able to look more deeply into ourselves and each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just because a therapist is of color, it doesn't mean that it's automatically.
Not at all. There still has to be work.
There still has to be work, yet it's a giant step.
Yeah, but it's a giant step of vulnerability. If you're already feeling like there are these external pressures that you have to adhere to, in order to be in survival mode, not even thriving mode, but in survival mode. If there's all of these things that I have to adhere to, and now you're asking me to essentially take all my clothes off in front of you and let you bear witness to some of my deeper pains, or the scar here, or the burn mark here, or the broken heart here. That's going to take time and sensitivity. And even I find more and more that in the work, like even just like admitting, oh, I fucked up.
Yeah.
Like, I'm so sorry. I realized that sounded dismissive. And then for them to go,
oh,
thank you
for being human.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I can trust you.
Yes.
If you're willing to say you made a mistake.
Right.
Right. And when I work with clinicians in training that are of color, we so frequently talk about, okay, so how do we build bridges of trust? Because it's good that we happen to be of color, but it's not the end all be all.
Right.
How do we build bridges of trust? How do you do it, Makisha?
Humor. Humor is a big, levity helps a lot, but also kind of setting the stage with them. So, I like metaphors, and I also like visual description. So if it's you and I here on this sound stage, then you and I are co-creating a situation. If it were just me and an audience, then now I am creating that total visual for the audience. But what's happening in therapy is that myself and the client or the patient or whatever you want to call them, we are both on this stage together. And so they can at some point feel comfortable enough to say, you know what, I don't like this lighting. I think we need to move that over there. Okay, let's try it. And then I can say, what about if we kind of sit a little bit closer together, and they can agree to that. But as opposed to kind of me like telling you what you need to do, we co-create the environment together. And I think that helps a lot. And sometimes for some clients, it feels like you're just chatting. But really what it is you're creating the space together. Yes. And that's a big part of connecting.
Connecting. We're back to that word that the pandemic made so challenging. When you are in spaces that are not a therapy setting, what do you find helpful to build those bridges of trust with people in our communities that are still flirting with, I don't know if I want to go to therapy, maybe. I'm hearing a little more about it. I'm not so sure. So, when you come in contact with people outside of the therapy space, what helps you to support their process of starting to consider this to be a supportive resource?
Yeah, they're starting to flirt with the
Flirting
idea.
with it.
I normalize the fear that it is scary. It's scary to go in front of somebody and talk about things that have been harmful or hurtful to you. And so, yeah, that's normal. So I want to normalize that. But I'm not like being the therapist there. Like if we're at a barbecue, I'm not like, and it's very normal to experience that.
Yeah,
No, I just go, yeah, dude, that's typical.
right.
That's a normal feeling. And then I say, don't close the door. So many people in our, lineage will say, you go talk to the pastor, or you go talk to, your abuela, or you go talk to this person or that person.
Or you don't tell anybody at all.
And you keep it in the house.
Right, keep it in the house.
Right.
We have long history that justifies not trusting.
That's what's up.
Right?
Yes.
On that note, let's visit the topic of historical trauma.
Okay.
Because you started alluding to it earlier when acknowledging that there is the history of trauma of the person of color seeking therapy, and also the therapist who happens to be of color.
Absolutely.
We bring this history into the moment, our own trauma, the kind of thing that may back us up when we say to a client, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be dismissive."
Yes.
I'm now conscious of it.
Yes. Yeah.
So just to support our listeners in this reflective process, let's talk about what is historical trauma.
Oh God, that's a long definition,
right? Right, it is.
Oh gosh, and there's so many ways to go with that.
Mm-hmm.
You put me on the spot, Melissa. I would have to say, like a little snapshot of it, as historical trauma are the traumas generationally that people of color have experienced in spaces or places where they have not been regarded as equal human beings, and those traumas being passed on generationally, and the people in those other generations experiencing traumatic events that are variations on the theme.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
That's a great snapshot.
Okay. That made my stomach hurt a little bit, but
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm so sorry. It's a term that we hear now more publicly.
Sure, yeah.
And especially because of how the magnifying lens of this pandemic has put a lot of stuff out there. So I thought it would be important for us to include it here.
Right.
As a little tidbit to build on.
Yes.
So with that said, and kind of recapping other episodes where we consulted about this, because during the earlier part of the pandemic when we were in quarantine, not able to leave home, not able to carry out certain routines that for many people served as a way of avoiding feeling their feelings.
Yes.
So now I'm home feeling my feelings. And so people are throbbing. These are the kinds of things that make historical trauma quite felt.
Definitely.
Strongly
deeply.
Felt. Deeply felt. And for those of us in our community that did not feel supported, it was very difficult to handle that throbbing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Harder than it would be with support. So now that we're talking more about mental health on not only social media but all
everywhere.
over.
Yeah.
Where's the shift, if you've noticed one, about people feeling more willing to tend to that throbbing?
Yeah.
That came punching.
I think the throbbing just got really loud, and people didn't really have a choice. Oh, you have a choice at some point, but just like any other animal, if we experience a level of pain that passes the threshold of being able to tolerate it, then you're going to howl. And so a lot of us have had to howl in the heightened pain pain moments
Right.
during the pandemic, the divisiveness that happened, the limited mobility, the not being able to see your people, the not being able to dance, the not being able to, the ways in which we have to think in terms of how we move about the world. We already had so many layers of how we police ourselves in varying formats, depending on the people of color and their history. But we already have a set of unspoken and sometimes spoken rules that we have to abide by in order to historically keep us safe.
Yes.
And then on top of that, I'm hurting more than I was even just abiding by those things. And so people are going to howl.
Yeah. I would submit that the howling definitely showed up in these protests.
Absolutely.
In these protests where all this throbbing, you got to express publicly along with everybody else that's throbbing.
Mm-hmm.
We're howling together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's necessary in the healing process to let this tension out.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point about safety, that's where it's important to then develop a circle of support.
Right.
And also examine our circle of support.
Hello.
Oh, because sometimes the circle is not necessarily a life-affirming one,
They have their own forms of equipment.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it really brings to bear the need to rethink, okay, who's in my circle? Is this circle really affirming my life, promoting my healing, or is it promoting that pain that we moved down generations?
Right.
It's a time to welcome into our lives people who've already been doing the work of healing.
And to respect that everybody is in their own journey. And so though you have the circle, it doesn't mean you throw out the people that aren't necessarily as fluent. It means that you respect that their equipment is not necessarily going to match with what I need right now.
Right. So again, honoring the power of reflection to see what I need to notice. What do we need to notice and why? And how do we support each other?
True.
Because we don't move in the world the way we do by accident. We've inherited these scripts.
Absolutely. I will, though, make a caveat of saying reflecting is also painful. And it takes a willing heart and mind to recognize that even pausing to sit, how in the Black church they say go to your prayer closet.
Right.
If you sit in that prayer closet long enough, something gonna get you.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that there are gonna be a lot of emotions that come forward that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with addressing or talking about with certain people. So again, going back to finding other people in your circle where you can kind of engage with, damn, I was thinking about this and this is what came up, and for them to be able to see you.
And that can take so much energy because now it involves second guessing, or maybe not second guessing, thinking differently about who you used to perceive as supportive.
Yes.
And even giving yourself permission to do that is revolutionary. This is part of how the pandemic shook so many of us because now you're feeling feelings that you didn't give yourself the opportunity to feel, or that were unconsciously there like a humdrum, and now they're like you're throbbing. The quarantine was brutal. Brutal.
Yeah, and the throbbing can be perceived as dangerous.
Understandably so.
So if I'm going to protest, or if a group of people of color are going to protest, then there's a historical expectation that people of color in large groups are dangerous. Your throbbing is dangerous. You are not allowed to throb because we don't know what to do with that. We being the collective, oppressive narratives.
Yes.
We don't know what to do with that. That's scary for us. And then it ends up kind of getting shut down. And I think that that's what we saw also, is that kind of ebb and flow of, we are hurting too. And having that historical aspect of you are not supposed to show that you are feeling any form of pain at all. That's not for you to do.
Right. Speaking of oppressive narratives, I think it's important to go back to something that I remember the two of us, along with our colleague, Dr. Brazil, talking about how people of color are not the only ones who've inherited stories of pain,
Yes,
lies,
yes,
about ourselves even.
yes.
People that we identify as members of the oppressive community,
Or the majority.
or the dominant culture, they too have inherited lies and pain. And a lot of it unconscious.
Yes.
A lot of it unconscious. And so, just like the pandemic triggered our throbbing, our protests, rather, in some ways is triggering their
reflections and
Yes.
throbbing
And fears.
Fears. Absolutely.
And so I mean, fear has been having a party, so to speak, in this pandemic. All fears have been just flaring up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you know, we definitely are responsible for our own healing, and it cannot hurt to acknowledge that we all need some form of healing.
Sure. You know,
All of us.
I think the part that's valuable that perhaps some people in the majority culture don't realize is that this time has been an opportunity for them too.
Exactly.
As opposed to some other people in the majority may experience it as something's being taken away from me, my power is being taken away from me, what I thought was inherent in terms of, superiority or what have you is being taken away. I have had the experience of many clients taking a pause and being able to painfully reflect on, God, you know what, that doesn't work for me, and I actually don't really like this, and this is not something that's for me. And at the same time, what do I do now as a person who is perceived as being a part of the majority culture? How do I heal? And then how do I also deposit into the collective?
Yes.
Not to the collective this or that, but to the collective.
And that brings to bear how their healing can inform their allyship.
Yes, that's a beautiful way of saying it. Absolutely.
So that way we are all healing. There are a lot of lies to dismantle from every angle. We've inherited lies about who we are and our worth, and so have members of the dominant culture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so what opportunities for shifting this pandemic has offered the entire world.
Yeah, what opportunities for being able to so oftentimes when I think of fear as us being like this with our shoulders up, right? And all of us have our shoulders up for one reason. If I'm trying to protect me being a part of the dominant majority, then I might have fear about the loss of that in some way, shape, or form. So I have to have my shoulders up. If I'm part of people of color and they're not of the dominant majority, and they're also having to navigate to make themselves feel that they have worth or to be surviving or even hopefully thriving, then I also carry fear and I have my shoulders up. What would it be like for all of us to be able to have these moments of reflection so that everybody can sit with their shoulders down and know that nothing is actually being taken away from anyone, but that your reflection of your humanity helps me in my reflection of mine.
Yes.
And how could that be healing as opposed to you're taking this or I'm taking that? But what are we depositing in each other?
Talk about thriving.
That would be amazing.
I mean, talk about moving from survival mode into thriving. Because even the dominant group, the behavior, unconscious or conscious, is also about survival.
Sure.
Protecting what they have,
Yeah.
just like we are protecting what we have. You know, the resilience afforded to us by all these healing ways that we've inherited, like you talked about, the music, the religion, all these different ways that have helped us stay afloat. Well, it's time to go beyond staying afloat. Let's thrive.
Yeah, that would be great.
Not easy.
No, not supposed to be. I don't think.
Not easy. It involves so much. And you know, thank you for what you did.
Oh, the visual.
The visual. And it's such a reminder that just like pain lives in the body, so does healing.
Absolutely. And the brain wants to heal and the body wants to heal. That's one of my EMDR trainers would say all the way through EMDR, you can't do this wrong. The brain wants to heal.
Right.
So even like outside of EMDR training, I have to remind myself, okay, this feels like I ain't doing a goddamn thing right now. But the brain wants to heal. So
right? so the body is equipped for healing.
Yes.
And so we just have to let ourselves wake up those aspects of our body that will move us naturally into healing.
Yes.
Just for our listeners that may not be familiar with EMDR, let's describe it briefly.
EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is it's a therapeutic modality that is geared primarily towards helping diminish trauma, helping to reprocess trauma, so that we can look at what our other assets are, what our gains are. And so you often will have a memory, a traumatic memory that you're looking at, and it's so visceral in the body that it feels like you're re-experiencing it in the moment. And so the goal of EMDR over time is to make that less and less impactful in terms of trauma, and then to deposit a positive cognition about that experience. So that's a snapshot.
That's a great snapshot, and hopefully, because you know our listeners are hearing this from you, and you're giving an example of what you practice, you're inviting reflection.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Possibilities.
Yeah.
And also important to remember that healing is not this linear thing. We go back and forth. It's like a cha-cha. Much like this pandemic has been like a cha-cha. We move forward, and then next thing you know, we go back because of the numbers and, all these different adjustments and transitions. Hopefully, they're breeding some amount of compassion for ourselves and each other, because we've all, globally have had to adjust to so much. And maybe, build that patience muscle.
Yeah, whether, there are phases again, but whether we want to believe it or not, this is one of the biggest global traumatic experiences that the human collective has experienced in a long time.
Yes.
And so that could be a unifying thing. It could also be a divisive thing.
Right.
But the hope is that it becomes more and more unifying.
I learned from some colleagues in Panama who do a lot of work with moving from one generation to the next. They shared with me in one of these episodes, the Spanish version of this podcast, that for the people who experienced the 1918 pandemic, and how that transformed the world at that time, the generations that followed inherited the tools that they gained. So now we are going to pass down new tools to the next generation in this particular pandemic. One last thing that I think could be helpful to this process is to acknowledge that many people in the business world have now been really immersed in this mental health discourse.
Sure.
How it impacts life in the workplace.
Yes, their employees.
And so you see how the work of equity and inclusion are so tied to all this healing we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have one word about that?
About equity and inclusion?
Equity and inclusion tied into what we've been reflecting on, how the workplace environment can be improved with all these insights.
Honestly, it's such a big machine.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be hard to kind of pinpoint one thing, but I think, again, it goes back to the people and the people within companies and their varying levels to be able to slow down enough to notice that somebody's not well.
Key.
That's I feel like is a basic one. I mean, equity and inclusion for lots of businesses is okay. Well, we have this many people of color and we have this many people of the dominant culture. We need to get this many people. That's not equity and inclusion.
That's not equity and inclusion.
That's you're all playing a crayon game. Like
Exactly.
you remember the crayons in the box?
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening there. That's not equity or inclusion. That's just, it looks good on paper.
Right.
But I think equity and inclusion requires more depth of thought, and it requires you to slow down enough to look at your job culture, the culture of your employing environment, and see in what ways are stigmatization and or over pathology and or negative, whatever, is being played out systemically.
Yes.
Who's the identified patient and why?
And why?
And then we need to back off of the identified patient and ask what they're adapting for a reason. So now we look at their adaptations and ask ourselves, why has adaptation happened that way? And that helps us look at the system more.
Yeah. So the survival mode and transition into thriving that we've been discussing at a larger scale shows up there in these ways you're describing.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, we could go for hours with this. I really thank you, Makisha, for consistently being available for these moments of thinking out loud.
Yeah, we do it anyway.
We do it all the
anyway
time.
Off camera.
We sure do. We
just did it the other day.
Right? So I would like to invite you to share with our audience how they can reach you.
Sure.
So that we can now bring this to a close.
Sure. So I will be launching my solo practice as of this month, and people can find me at on psychologytoday.com. You can just put in my name, Dr. Makisha Lawrence, or you can go to my website, drmakishalawrence.com. That should be launched very shortly.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so I thank all of you for taking the opportunity to listen to our conversation. And as always, may we continue transforming the world with reflections. Thanks for joining us.